Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. For those who don't know, Assalamu alaikum means peace be upon you, a way Muslims greet one another with peace and dignity. And therefore, I greet you all tonight with peace, hope for peace, and earning for peace. My name is Noor. I am the president of the Muslim Student Association at NC State. And the purpose of today's event is for everyone to have a better understanding of the historical and political significance of the past year and beyond. Today marks 365 days of destruction, horror, and genocide, along with 75 years of occupation of Palestinian land. It is our hope that you leave today's event with a clear perspective of the realities faced by Palestinians and the struggle for liberation. As we get started, I would like to introduce our incredible panelists who are going to share some diverse perspectives. First, we have Dr. Hisham Sarsour, an active member of the local Muslim community and a proud NC State alumni since 1991. An experienced engineer, Dr. Sarsour is a frequent activist and speaker of Middle East affairs. He holds lectures on Islamic movements in the Middle East and the West, and he's recently returned from a trip from the West Bank in Palestine. And we're glad to have him here today to share what is currently happening on ground in Palestine. Dr. Kristen Elf, an assistant professor of history, specializing in the history of the Middle East and North Africa. Dr. Elf is currently writing her first book investigating the evolution of land sales between Levantine companies and the Jewish land purchases in Palestine. Next semester, she'll be teaching HI 466, which is the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So keep an eye out for her class. Then we have Dr. Jamal Dillahan, an assistant professor of history, specializing in African American history and public history. Outside of campus, Dr. Jamal was an outspoken advocate for the Palestinian struggle. He shows up at protests, general assemblies, and is highly active in our community. Next semester, he'll be offering HI 373, African American history since 1875. Lastly, we have Dr. Hodjabul, an assistant professor of international studies and political science, focusing on the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy. He's the chairman of the Muslim American Public Affairs Council, MAPAC, and is highly involved through lobbying in North Carolina. If you ever get the chance, I highly encourage you to attend one of his insightful international studies classes, which he'll be offering next semester, IS 250, Globalization in North Carolina. Please let us welcome all our speakers for today.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon all of you. I will, in the 15 minutes, try to shed light on the reality now that exists in the Gaza and in the West Bank. Basically, the number of Jews who live in Palestine is about 7 million, plus or minus 500,000. The number of Palestinians who live in historic Palestine, believe it or not, is about 7 million, plus or minus 500,000. The Jewish population, 850,000, lives in settlements in the West Bank. When I said 850,000, you might have seen a number of 6,000 or 600,000. They excluded settlements in Jerusalem. But if you include settlements in Jerusalem, we are talking about 850,000 settlers live in the West Bank. So what is the West Bank? If you look at the map from the left, the second one, the green on your right is the West Bank. And the little green on the left is Gaza. So basically, in 1948, Egypt took over Gaza, Jordan took over the West Bank, and the UN gave the Israel 56% to Palestine, and they took 78%. So the number is comparable. Now, where do the Palestinians live? About 20% of the Israeli population are Arabs, Muslims and Christians. There are about 2 million plus who live in the large section between Gaza and the West Bank and up north, basically Haifa, Jaffa, Lid, Ramla, and Nasra, and so on and so forth. So 2 million plus, another 2 million plus live in the West Bank, and another 2 million plus live in Gaza. So that's the population that is there. Also interestingly, which is not related to this, the number of Jews and Palestinians in the world is about 15 million, plus or minus a million. So they are equal inside and outside. I visited Gaza 20 years ago. Since then, I could not go and visit, so I'm just going to give numbers based on the statistics that's available. The West Bank is available for a visit for anyone who carry an American citizenship. You can go through Tel Aviv or you can go through the West Bank. Most of you are familiar with what's going on Gaza, basically. But some of the statistics is that we have 650,000 students who do not have a second year of education now. You have 100,000 of higher education who do not have any education. You have about 11,600 kids who were killed. You have about 41,000 total of Gazans who were killed since the start of the genocide in Gaza. You have about 750 teachers who were killed in Gaza. You have about 1,100 students who were also from higher education killed in Gaza. We have 130 professors killed in Gaza, and we have 93% of the school structures have been destroyed. Most of it is UN schools. And we have 130 buildings belong to universities that already have been destroyed. Let me just quickly give the statistics on the Ministry of Trust, Al-Awqaf. 814 masjid, mosques were destroyed, which is 79% of the mosques in Gaza. 148 partially destroyed, 3 churches destroyed. We have 19 cemeteries out of 60 totally destroyed in this regard, or partially destroyed. 8 of them is totally destroyed. And we have 238 people who work for the Islamic Trust have also been killed in the events. So Gaza is going through a genocide, and many of you have seen the picture. What most of you may be not aware of is the status of the Palestinians inside Israel. Those are the ones who have stayed when 1948 declaration of Israel took place, when 650,000 Palestinians were ejected from their homeland, went to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, and beyond. At that time, those who were remaining, some of them were massacred in Deir Yassin and other places, and the others stayed, and the Israelis gave them Israeli citizenship. That's why they are represented in the parliament, and they have used to have, a few years ago, the same rights to a certain extent, until Israel declared it's a Jewish state. They became a second citizens in this regard. As for the West Bank, the agreement after Oslo was supposed to have 3 different areas. One is totally controlled by the Palestinian Authority in terms of security and administration, but the Israelis can enter any time if they coordinate with them. And this was supposedly the big cities like Hebron, Khalil, Nablus, Bethlehem, and so on and so forth. In this regard, at this point, that those cities really have been reoccupied. So basically, this different arrangement is no longer there. Some of you have seen last week when the army came from the settlements in my hometown, which is Albira, went through the town, went to the center of town Ramallah, and closed Al Jazeera. There was no consultation, as if the Palestinian Authority does not exist. The most of the middle part, which is north of Jerusalem, of the West Bank, look at the green just in the middle, that's where the seat of the Palestinian Authority is. That's where Arafat is buried, that's where the Abbas office is, that's where the Abbas residence is. I live about a mile from that place. So in the 6 weeks that I stayed in that area, there are 300,000 people who live in that area. I have not seen a single Israeli, not a single one. Except, of course, our in-laws and relatives who come to visit us from the 1948 land. Why is this? Because Abbas and his cronies are controlling the people. Whoever the suspect of problem, they just take him and put him in jail on behalf of the Israelis. So this area is really very, very quiet. The issue now with the north and the south, Hebron, Beit Laham, that's where we find the struggle, that's where we find incidents. Jenin and Tulkarm and the area in the north, this basically destroyed totally. You can see the infrastructure, the streets, the piping system for water, for sewage, all of it was taken in this regard from its place. So the suffering is there. In fact, as of 3 days ago, they bombed Tulkarm, which is a city in the north, with those F-16 or F-35, either one, from the sky. I imagine, this is under occupation. Think of the, Davidians when they, had issues with the government. Imagine that the government will take an F-16 and bomb the Davidian complex. If you do not know about that, you can Google it. This was in Texas years back in this regard. So, what are some of the main features that are happening right now in Palestine? The first one is Smotrich and Abdel Fair, who are the most right-wing members of the government, have started a plan to really change the status of the West Bank from being under military rule to being under civilian rule. And this is very serious, because what it is basically is there is no Palestinian Authority. So there's a Palestinian Authority by name, but actually they have no authority, zero. At this point they have some authority in this regard. And Smotrich made it clear in the Hebrew press that I am coordinating this with Netanyahu. I'm not doing this on my own. So basically, it was Netanyahu who told him, keep the Palestinian Authority at least, people can see it. Because the international community will not agree to destroy it. So, but it's there only by name. The second thing is that settlers start attacking West Bank villages in a number that's unprecedented in the back. When you look back a year, 2 years, 3 years, there are two, I'll give 2 quick examples. One is the orchards, the olive oil. How do you get the olive oil? You go and get the olives from the trees. So Palestinians are famous for their olive oil. So people go and cultivate the olive, and this is the season. It used to be a source of joy. I remember when I was growing up, we used people eat together, celebrate together. Now it's a nightmare because the settlers can come anytime, attack the Palestinian villagers, steal the olive, and burn the olive trees. Some of it has been there for 20 years, some of it has been there for 40 years. And this is really happening every day. We had Smotrich when there was an incident in the north, basically a city called Hawara, a settler was killed. Smotrich said, we should burn Hawara. That was the term, burn, for one settler who was killed. And people said, what is this, another Holocaust? Until he came back and said, I did not really mean it. The economy is destroyed. There is no economy in Palestine. And the banks are, it's really funny that the US government have presented to the G7 about 2 weeks ago that there's a banking crisis in Palestine and the banks will collapse if Smotrich go with his plan. So there was pressure on Smotrich to extend the cooperation between Israeli banks and Palestinian banks for another 2 months. I'll give you a small example. My wife had an account here, an account in Palestine. She took a check for $2,000, tried to deposit, not cash it. And she was told we will not accept American checks. Because basically all the transactions have to go through the Israeli banks. There's a lot of shekels. Traditionally, every year, there is a tradition where at the end of the week, every year this is the case until this year, every end of the week, the Palestinian banks send all the shekels, which is the Israeli currency, to the Israeli banks, so they can get dollars or dinars and buy things from outside of the country and so on and so forth. Now they can. For the past few weeks, there's a lot of shekels, and you cannot, in fact, if you go to the ATM machine, they used to give you a choice. Do you want dollars, shekels, or dinars, during dinars? Now the only choice is shekels. And people have panicked, and they are buying gold with whatever money that they have, they withdraw from the bank in this regard. There are also other aspects from, for example, being, having an American citizen, not residency in Palestine. I spent 18 days and nights in Jerusalem, Masjid al-Aqsa, in this regard. Not a single person from the 2 million plus from the West Bank made it to Masjid al-Aqsa or to Jerusalem. There's a military checkpoint, and you cannot, go through it unless you have a Canadian citizenship or an American citizenship or a European citizenship from that perspective. The economy, as I said, is in shambles. You had 200,000 Palestinians who used to walk inside Israel. After that, it went from 200,000 to 0. So basically, they are not able to, for example, get their produce. A kilo of tomato used to be 2 shekels, which is 2 pounds, 2 shekels. Now it's 12 shekels, because basically the tomatoes are done. So I was wondering, me and my wife, we were there. I was wondering how the family with 6 and 7 can do. Let me give a final example, inshallah, and maybe the question answer session could explain. Haaretz published this story of a Palestinian Authority guard. It's one of Abbas's cronies. Basically, they protect Abbas as if somebody wanted to assassinate him. We have about 100, 150 standing in the street to protect him. They had an interview with one of them, and he said, look, I got my check at the end of the month, and the check go to the bank. The bank take all the loans, the furniture, the car, whatever. He said, I was left with 40 shekels. 40 shekels. What's 40 shekels? It's less than $15 for the whole month for himself and his wife and children to live. This is, of course, unfortunately, the policy of Salam Fayyad, another American agent who came to be prime minister, and he ordered the banks to offer loans to everyone who can or have a job and is willing can pay. That's why the bulk of the people are now drowned in loans that they cannot pay. Thank you very much. I'll stop here, inshallah.
Hi, thank you very much all for coming and for inviting me. I'm responsible for the history portion of this panel. And so today I'm going to talk about the history of how did we get here from 1881 to the present in 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to skim over some things, and so I hope that in the Q&A you can, if you need something fleshed out, then please, by all means, ask. So I want to start way back in the Ottoman Empire, where you see that there's no Palestine here. There's in Beirut Vilayet, which is kind of like a state with a bunch of different counties. We also have Jerusalem as its own administrative district. And this does not mean that Palestine didn't exist, though. For those of you who read Arabic, can anyone read what's there on the map?
Palestine.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Palestine land.
Right, the land of Palestine. And so this is a map from the Ottoman Empire. People that lived in this space, which is kind of an amorphous space, called themselves Palestinians and called the place that they lived Philistine or Palestine. And so we do have a Palestine that exists historically in the Ottoman Empire, even though we don't have an administrative territory called Palestine. We also have a high number or some population of Jews in what's historic Palestine. You can see that this is from 1870. We have some Jewish population, Jewish Arab population, what's now called Mizrahi Jews. And then from 1881, we have a slight incline, and then we have a lot more Jewish immigration to Palestine. And that immigration came with the pogroms in 1881, the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, and anti-Semitic violence. Jews went on ships, and about 2 million Ashkenazi Jews fled Russia. Not everyone in that ship went to Palestine. Many of them went to the United States. Very small portion of them actually ended up in Palestine, but they ended up in buying land, taking some land, buying some land, and setting up these villages that you see on the right. And this is from 1881 to 1914. You can see that the major Jewish settlements are the ones with the black circle. The hollow circles are other Jewish settlements, and then there's some Arab towns, or Arab Palestinian Arab towns. And in World War II, we're skipping ahead. World War I, we have the British, the Allies winning, the Entente winning, and the carving up of the Ottoman Empire. And so at the end of World War I, we have the British taking over this part of Bilad al-Sham, a part of the Ottoman Empire, and calling it Mandate Palestine. And giving some of that, we can talk about why, but giving some of that to be Jordan. But this orange part, they kept as Palestine, which they ruled over as a mandate. And the mandate was given to them by the United Nations, which started in 1922, this mandate for Palestine. And pretty much it said, it was a Class A mandate, and it said, these people that live here are not ready for sovereignty yet. So we need a European power to go in and to help them become more modern and help them to govern themselves. Of course, many scholars now, I think most scholars now would call this a more masked form of colonialism. And during the war, we also have the British then in 1917 promising, since we already have an influx of Jews, of Ashkenazi Jews, moving into Palestine, emigrating from parts of Eastern Europe, we have the British administration saying, okay, we're also going to promise this land as a homeland for the Jewish people, a national home for the Jewish people. And so they have kind of a dual interest. The British come in and they say, well, we're going to take care of the indigenous Palestinian Arabs, and we're going to also make this a home for the Jewish, or home for the Jewish people. And quickly, the Jewish immigrants to Palestine started to kind of close themselves off. There was a lot of difficulty when they got there because they couldn't compete with Arab labor. A lot of Jewish immigrants who owned orange farms, for example, which is what these are right here, they would rather have employed an Arab that lived on the land, that knew what was going on, how to farm it, for much cheaper than what a new Jewish immigrant that lived in the city before would. And so there's a lot of competition between Arab laborers and Jewish laborers, and Arab laborers were cheaper. And so we have the beginning of what is called a kibbutz, where there's a movement, a Zionist labor Zionist movement to partition off these big orange groves, these plantations, and make sure that no Arab labor got in, no Arabs were living there. And so we have this separation, this separatism that starts right before World War I, but then continues in a really big way in the 1920s. And so if you can see that in 1925, we have a huge spike in immigration to Palestine, and then also again in 1935. And why is that? That's because of World War II. And we have the development of these of Jewish labor and this partition off of the economy of the Jewish settlers that is different from the Palestinian Arabs at the time. And the Palestinian Arabs then revolt in 1936 to 1939. And they revolt against the buying of land, the Jewish immigrants kicking them off of their land. They revolt against being kind of pushed out of the economy, even if it's just informally, or pushed out of their homes, which in some cases happened when in creation of these kibbutzim. And if a lot of you are wearing the kufiya right now, the kufiya actually became more of the Palestinian national dress, or like a symbol of Palestinian nationalism at this time during the revolt in 1936 to 1939. And really, it's the peasants that wore it, and this was kind of more of a unifying garment to be able to. Everyone was wearing it, all Palestinians, a lot of Palestinians, to show their nationalism. And if you can also see that after 1935, there's a decrease. After World War II, there's a strong decrease in immigration from Europe to Palestine. And obviously, as you might imagine, the people who were in charge of the Yishuv, the government that were in charge of the Jewish immigrants, they were unhappy. A lot of people became unhappy in the 1940s because they saw these numbers dwindling of immigration, and the British wrote a white paper saying, no more immigration to Palestine. This is enough. We can't handle it. Of course, the British, in many ways, created it, but they created the problem, right? And so they decided we're going to limit Jewish immigration to Palestine for a little while, the Jewish community, and especially the military branches, who were armed in 1936 by the British, who were also armed because they wanted to they created armed guards to keep out Arabs from this kibbutz. And when they did that, they formed what's called the Haganah in 1920, which is now the core of what the IDF is. It becomes the IDF after 1948. We also have these offshoots of the Haganah, which are the Stern and the Irgun. And this, in particular, the Irgun then bombs the King David Hotel. And they bombed the King David Hotel because that was the headquarters of the British government in Palestine. And so the British say, okay, enough is enough. We're not going to be doing this anymore. We're leaving. And they gave over the mandate of Palestine to the UN. And they said to the UN, okay, now we're going to have, you take care of this. We're done with this, right? Nothing says colonialism like mucking it up and then leaving, right? And so the UN then creates a partition plan. The partition plan, as was just said, was 56% to a Jewish state and 43% to an Arab state. I want to pause actually and ask, one of these groups accepted the partition plan, and one of these groups rejected the partition plan. Which one is which, do you think? Yeah.
The Jews accepted and Palestinians refused.
Why?
I mean, when you're the Yeshus and you're getting 56% of the land with a minority population, it's kind of a good deal, right?
Yeah, so the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs at the time said, well, there's 1.3 million Arabs here, and the Jews only own 6 to 8% of the land. Why are they getting 56%? And what the UN said was, we're expecting a lot more immigration to Palestine, and so we're going to make room for more Jewish immigration to Palestine. If you ask a leader, a Palestinian leader right now, some of them, especially ones in the US, whether or not they thought that where the turning point was, where they might have made a mistake, they would say maybe we should have taken this deal. But in hindsight is 2020, right? And so this brings us to the Nakba, which is called the catastrophe, which is the catastrophe in Arabic, Nakba, and the War of Independence. So as soon as the British withdraw all of their troops from Palestine, then as we see that there's a strong, a group of people that have been heavily armed by the British for a very long time, and a group of people that have not. And so it was, everyone was ready. The Arab countries invaded Palestine, and then the Israelis then became, what would become Israelis, so the Haganah, what would become the IDF, then tries to take all the land that they were promised in 1947, and then some. And so what happens is, in the aftermath of the Nakba, we have 30 plus massacres. Still, this is contended, a very contentious history. There's 13,000 people, probably more, killed, 750,000 Palestinians displaced from the land that's historical, or the Mandate Palestine, and Israel then declares 78% of historic Palestine as Israel. And so if you see that the map right here, there's about 150 to 190,000 Palestinians that get Israeli citizenship. They get an Israeli passport, as was mentioned earlier, but the majority of the people who are living in Palestine, the refugees are displaced into the West Bank, and displaced into the Gaza Strip, displaced into Egypt and Jordan, and they get Jordanian passports. Jordan takes over the West Bank, Egypt takes over Gaza Strip. And they're living as refugees in tents, often in makeshift housing. There's not, it's not very sanitary or good conditions that they're in.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
And so, if we move quickly then to 1967, you can see that if we have this for a few years, we have the West Bank and Gaza, we have Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza with Jordanian citizenship and with Egyptian citizenship. And we can talk about also kind of Syria. There's some that moved to Syria and were forcibly displaced to Syria, and there's some also forcibly displaced to Lebanon. Lebanon did not give them citizenship, and we can talk about why that is in the Q&A if you want. And so in 1967, we have another war, and this is there's a long history to who started this war, but the first shot fired was from Israel. And during this war, it only took 6 days, and Israel then decided, well, goes into Sinai, West Bank, Golan Heights, Gaza, and this is kind of the reality on the ground right now, almost right now, is what we're seeing in this post-67 moment. And after 1967 war, the Security Council resolution the UN Security Council passes a resolution 242 saying withdraw from all Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. And again, we can talk about why that doesn't happen. But when we talk about why the West Bank and Gaza are illegally occupied, we're talking about this resolution right here, UN Security Council 242, that said Israeli armed forces need to withdraw from the territories, or from territories. And as then when there's a military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, there's intense suppression of nationalism, all nationalist icons, all nationalist, the Palestinian flag, for example, is outlawed. I think that about a year ago, or now everyone's familiar with the watermelon as being a symbol of Palestine. The reason why the watermelon is that is because the flag was prohibited to be flown. And so the colors are the same as the watermelon. And so that was a way to show nationalism without doing anything illegal. Even waving za'atar, the wild thyme, even waving that was illegal. You could go to prison for doing that in the West Bank and Gaza. And if you're wondering what happened to Sinai, because for those of you that know about this map already, or that this map today, you know that Sinai now Sinai belongs to Egypt now. And the reason why is because of Camp David I, that September 1978. Egypt made peace with Israel, recognized Israel. Egypt had fought a lot of different wars. The US said, hey, Sadat, who you see here on the right, the US said, we'll forgive some of your IMF loans if you make peace with Israel. And Anwar Sadat really asked for the West Bank, Gaza, and Sinai to be given back to Egypt, and the West Bank and Gaza to be Palestinian. They did not accept that deal, but they did give Sinai back to Anwar Sadat as one of the first Arab countries to formally recognize Israel. And so Israel withdrawals from the Sinai. They're complete in 1982. You can see that the settlement started along the coast there, and then also in this buffer zone between Sinai, or between Sinai and Israel. And this was hard for the Israeli military. You can see that there were that settlers would not leave, and so they had to physically drag them out. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, we have settlements multiplying in the West Bank. Between 67, when the war ended, in 77, we have a few settlements, but then from 77 to 87, we have a proliferation of new Israelis, Jews moving into the West Bank and creating settlements. And then all these are connected by roads. If you think about the West Bank and you see all the checkpoints, you hear about all the checkpoints, it's because these settlements are being connected by bypass roads that Palestinians are not allowed to travel on. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was established by the Arab League as a political entity to represent the Palestinians. This happened in 1964. Yasser Arafat, he then becomes president or leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1969. And then the PLO launches attacks from Jordan into Palestine, or into what is Israel. And at some point, they launch enough attacks, and Jordan says, we don't want this to be on our watch, and so they make the PLO move to southern Lebanon. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because this map is actually from a few days ago, and it's telling us the area of Israeli control from 1985 onward. And the Israelis create this buffer zone in southern Lebanon. And as they create this buffer zone, and then also in 1982, they pair up with the Phalange Party, which is a Christian party in Lebanon, and they carry out large-scale massacres in Lebanon of Palestinian civilians. This is a picture of Time magazine. Time magazine massacre in Lebanon, Palestinian civilians are slaughtered. And this was carried out by Ariel Sharon. He's the guy there in the foreground in that picture. The UN did say that the massacres of Sabra Shatila were a genocide. Ariel Sharon, it went as far as the Israeli government said that Ariel Sharon was responsible for these massacres, and they told him that he had to step down from his defense minister position, but he did not have to step down from the cabinet. And later you'll see he becomes prime minister. Also in 1982, 1982 is these extreme massacres, and it's not a coincidence that Hezbollah then people get together and form what is Hezbollah. And the Hezbollah, a Shia group, because most Shia live in southern Lebanon, where the PLO is, they are formed to expel imperial powers from Lebanon, North Israel, and what they call the West. Again, we see, if we're moving to the West Bank, we see that in 1987 we have these settlements that are in the West Bank, and this is causing, I told you, the restricting movements of Palestinians in 1987, and this is also then fuel for what is the first Intifada in 1987. If you can see that the difference in picture, this is a poster from this. And Intifada is uprising in Arabic. It's a uprising in the West Bank. And during this uprising in the West Bank against the settlements, we have the rise of Islamist oppositions to Israel and the creation of Hamas, which was formed in 1982. It was a resistance party, and it was strengthened because in Lebanon, the PLO is a shell of an organization because Israel has bombed it, and so Hamas is formed to become. They thought we needed something stronger to represent the Palestinian people than the PLO, who was weak at the time. No, I'm not done. So marathon. So in 1993, Yitzhak Rabin, who you see here with Yasser Arafat, they are, this is the beginning of peace, 1993, because the Intifada is going on and on and on. And a fun fact is that this is the first time that a representative from the Palestinian government, or shadow government, and the Israelis shook hands, even came face to face. And Bill Clinton, in this picture, to make the picture happen, he actually pushed them together. But this was actually a real moment of hope for a lot of people, both Palestinians and Israelis, that wanted this to happen. But Rabin was assassinated in 1995 because of the Oslo Accords, and Rabin is then, the gunman said Rabin wanted to give out the country to the Arabs, and who takes over 6 months later is Benjamin Netanyahu. And he is a Likud party, he's not labor. Remember, we have in the very early beginnings of these kibbutzim, we have labor Zionists. He is in part of the Likud, which is a revisionist Zionist, which are more militant, thinking that we need military power to create and sustain the state of Israel. So his philosophy is we need to use guns and violence to make this happen. We, over time, we have lots of different agreements and accords, but really nothing is happening because we have still settlers moving into the West Bank that's supposed to be something slated for Palestine, for a Palestine. Every day that they're in this, these talks, there's still settlers moving into the West Bank, and so it really doesn't seem like the agenda is meeting what the actions on the ground are carrying out, are doing. There's also then a separation wall being built, and some would say that this separation wall is also a land grab, right? You can see that the wall cuts into the West Bank, and so that is also part of making Israel bigger. And, oh my gosh, not. I told you, it's a real long history. 2 more minutes, okay. And as part of these accords, we have an disengagement from the West Bank, but also Gaza. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this, about Gaza Strip. In 2005, Gaza, there's a withdrawal from the Gaza Strip by Israelis. It's a unilateral move on the part of Israel, and we have elections. When we have elections in 2006, we have Hamas winning the elections. And something that you might not know, I know you probably know some of that, is that the US, after this happened, said, oh no, we need to do something, and they decided to create a coup and armed Fatah, which was the rival party to Hamas. Hamas then got wind of this plot to form a coup, to have a coup, and Hamas decided to preemptively strike, and so then that's how Hamas then took over all of Gaza. And so now I'm wrapping up. So this is a picture for the settlements from 2014. You can see the map here, and I think this was said by the former speaker too, that there's now maps being created that want to say that these are Palestinian settlements, not Israeli settlements. That Palestinians, as if Palestinians are settling here and we're not indigenous to the West Bank. So I found this map kind of disturbing. The one on the one with yellow, that's where the densest population of Palestinians live, and then we have the separation zone. We have all of the settlements that are coming into the West Bank. And of course, you probably saw this very recently. If you look at this, Israel, there's no West Bank, no Gaza on this. There's no Palestinians at all in this map. There's no Palestinians in this map at all. And so I'm going to leave you with today. Who has the marathon? Leave you with today, and as the former speaker said, this picture right here is of yesterday. It is olive farming season in the West Bank, and these are settlers beating up a person that's trying to farm olives from their own trees. We have, as you know, kind of dozens killed in Gaza very recently, and these are some of the other headlines that I collected. But I think that picture, this is what's going on right now, and I think that history from 1881 to the present can tell that kind of a full story of how we got here. So thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. So I know this might be a little unusual, but I don't know if there's anybody who could just do maybe one chant, just to get the energy in the room. Just one chant, and then I'll proceed, and it'll provide a little context about. So this is one little free Palestine. Could somebody do that for me?
Free Palestine.
Oh, okay. Okay, answer me a little better. One person, just Just say free, free Palestine, and then everybody responds.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
All right, I can't interrupt the chant. So first, I just want to say that we are in a critical time for our world, our planet, and the movement against war. And it's going to require a lot of focus, a lot of discipline to move our society in the direction that we want it to go. I must say I'm a historian, and all of what I do is guided by that. But when it comes to Palestine, or when it comes to moving the world forward, I actually did not approach, my understanding of Palestine didn't begin as a historian. It began as somebody who was a high school student in 2014 and wanted to change the world. I was learning about the school-to-prison pipeline. I was learning about African-American history. And then one of many wars on Gaza continued. And so as I'm a young kid trying to understand why the world is the way that it is, understanding about my people, my history, I was also learning about Palestine. And so much so that I wore my keffiyeh everywhere, in class, in school, in high school. In fact, I even took, I think, my senior picture, one of them, with a keffiyeh on. That's how deep I saw it. When I got to college, it remained the same, and I had the honor of participating in the demilitarized German-Palestine coalition that ended police exchanges with the German police department and the Israeli occupying forces. And so my understanding of Palestine really emerged from a participant in the movement to better humanity, in the movement against war, the movement against occupation, the movement against imperialism. But then when I started to study history, and this is why history, I think, is important, because it began to justify what I was doing. I found reason, I found more clarity in what I was doing, because at first I was approaching it from a moral standpoint, like this is wrong, this is war, there's overlap, the U.S. is responsible for this, the U.S. was responsible for suffering here. But when I started to study history, something in my view that you can't debate, it showed me that if I wanted to understand African Americans, I had to understand internationalism. I had to understand the fight against imperialism, and I had to understand Palestine. And so I have argued, I will continue to argue that you can't understand African American history, especially in the 20th century, without understanding Palestine. And so I do a little brief history of why I say that, and then what it means for us today. And I will attempt to do that in 10 minutes, but we'll see if I can do that. So the reason I only have one photo, I don't have a presentation. The reason I have a photo of Brother Malcolm is because he's kind of seen as the origin point of Black and Palestinian solidarity from the context of the African American struggle within the United States. And before I talk about Brother Malcolm, I do want to say this. When I was doing work in support of Palestine, understanding Palestine, I would be told, especially by older people, that it was too complicated, that you can't understand it, But then once I really started to study history, my favorite line to say is that if you understand apartheid in South Africa, you understand what's happening in Palestine. If you understand colonialism in Africa, you understand what's happening in Palestine. If you understand what is happening to indigenous people, you understand what's happening in Palestine. And if you understand Jim Crow, you know what's happening in Palestine. So many African Americans who have gone to Palestine, who have expressed their firm support for Palestinians, have made that connection, have made that point. So my moral commitment was supported by undeniable historical facts. And so Brother Malcolm actually went to Palestine 3 times. First in 1959, he was with the Nation of Islam, and 2 times in 1964. He was in the Gaza Strip. And out of this trip, Brother Malcolm really reached some conclusions. He wrote an article for the Egyptian Gazette. We talked about, he has this famous quote that people draw from it, that the Israeli justification or occupation of Palestine has no legal or moral basis in history. So Brother Malcolm is talking about this occupation is not rooted in any historical clarity of justification. So if one is opposing it, history is on your side. If one is trying to justify it, history is not on your side. So Brother Malcolm really sets the tone, and then a generation of young people who are part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee founded here at Shaw University in 1960. They were the heartbeat of the civil rights movement. They would release a statement in support of Palestine. And their statement is important because what they pointed out was that the U.S. support for the Israeli occupation and what has happened, this is a battle against imperialism, this is a battle against capitalism. And so these are young people who are coming out of the civil rights movement, who are leading sit-ins, who are desegregating lunch counters, who are doing all these different elements, who are fighting for voting rights. They reached this logical conclusion. They're working in the South. They reached this conclusion that the support for Palestine was something that they had to do, that their work in the Deep South, fighting against Jim Crow, called them to do. And so it was this undenying commitment. So people from Kwame Ture to people like Orland Cox or Charlie Cobb, whoever, you name it, the young people in SNCC, had a firm understanding of opposing imperialism and the importance of supporting the people of Palestine. In fact, they did it in 1967 and lost all their funding. So Zionist forces responded in that way. And so these young people took a bold stance. They were uncompromising. And so when I say, talk about African American history in Palestine, right, you can't be denied. If you look even at the 1960s, Palestine is a crucial part of the African American freedom struggle. I got 10 minutes, so I got to make sure I follow my script, because if not, I get to talking. And then there's even, I think oftentimes we overlook, we talk about the Black Panther Party for self-defense, we talk about James Baldwin, we talk about Audre Lorde, June Jordan's support for Palestine, which is very important, but we don't talk about how there's a Southern character to it, There are people like Reverend Douglas Moore, who led sit-ins in Durham, North Carolina, who would go and participate in anti-colonial struggles in Africa in the 1960s and 1970s and come back and express his full support for Palestine. So this connection runs deep. And even beyond just the question of African Americans, when you look at Black people in the support of Palestine, it includes the diaspora. So African liberation struggles, when I say those who understood colonialism at its highest stage, who experienced it, they know how to identify it. So that's why so many African liberation leaders who are fighting for independence of African countries express their support for Palestine. I mean, of course, we know Nelson Mandela said our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestine. Leaders in Burkina Faso like Thomas Sankara went to the UN in the United States and expressed his full support for the Palestinian people. Or Sekou Touré, the first president of Guinea, expressed his support for Palestine. Or Julius Nyerere, who talked about colonialism in Africa and said what the Palestinians are going through is a much expanded stage of colonialism. It's far intense, it's brutal. So you have these African liberation leaders who experienced colonialism firsthand and led movements against them who are supporting the Palestinian people. And so when people tell you that it's complex or that you can't understand it, one just has to look at history of those fighting against colonialism and imperialism and so many other things, and you have your answer for it. And I also want to talk about one other thing as it relates to, African American support for Palestine, because I think it's important. And I think we've reached a period of where our solidarity has gotten stuck. We often quote Malcolm, we often look at the Black Panther Party, we look at SNCC. These are all very important examples, but we stop there. And in my view, when we use history, when we understand history, when we see history as a tool to make the world a better place, you don't just understand something, you build upon it. You add, more traditions to that movement. We're at a crucial stage where we need to do that. We need to figure out how we use history to improve humanity. How has the power structure adapted to your tactics, your engagement, your fight back? We can say, we appreciate the anti-apartheid movement, which is important, it's good, but how do we build on the anti-apartheid movement is a question that we have to ask ourselves. And I also want to talk one thing about Black elected officials. Truthfully, how it's been engaged right now is a little embarrassing. Because if you look early on, in the period, post-70s, maybe even to the 80s, not to romanticize him or anything, but Reverend Jesse Jackson's campaign was a very important campaign because his perspective, his position on what he articulated for the Middle East was one of the most advanced that existed. It was one that was arguably supportive of the Palestinian people, very rare. And he had two important runs for president. And so when people talk about a black elected official who might be running for an office can't take a firm position, well, if you look early on at black elected officials, or you look at black political conventions in the 1960s, many split, many got into big debates over the question of Palestine. There were some who were firm, saying we're not moving, we're going to pass a resolution. There was some saying, well, we can't do that. But there was a firm line that there was going to be no compromise on this question of Palestine. And so as we move forward, we have to hold people, I believe, to a standard. We have to understand history. We have to use history, but we can't let it stop us from being creative and building in the present. And so when I think about solidarity, when I think about which way forward, truthfully, I think about Cuba. When I think about consistent solidarity, I think about how Cuba and Fidel Castro have been firm supporters of the Palestinian people since the Cuban Revolution emerged. How the Latin American School of Medicine not only trains doctors in the U.S. for free to come back to be community-trained doctors, but they train Palestinian doctors to go back to Gaza or the West Bank and be community doctors there. And so when we talk about what solidarity, what support looks like, the examples are there, history is there. Not a question in my view, but we have to ask 1 year from 1 year into the genocide is how do we move our movement forward? How do we build on Brother Malcolm? How do we build on SNCC? How do we build on the Black Panther Party? How do we build on some of the thinking that Reverend Jesse Jackson put forward for us? So we have a big charge before us, and it's going to require some very serious focus, some very serious discipline, and some very serious fight. So if you don't take anything from me, I believe that African American history is not just understanding African Americans, it's about using history to help make the world a better place. African American history is about change. It's about building a world we want to see. And so if you take anything from what I said, and my minutes, it's been 2 minutes, so I'm concluding. Take that history as a tool, but we have to be bold enough to think of new things in the present. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace be upon you. I do want to thank the MSA for organizing this. Thank you, Ms. Noor. Students, thank you for coming. Fellow panelists, faculty, staff, friends, community members, community leaders. Thank you very much. My talk will focus basically on American foreign policy. Why American foreign policy, not Canadian foreign policy? Because America is the only country that has leverage in the region. So we're going to talk about that today. So bear with me. I like maps, so I know exactly where we are, what we're talking about. This map is of the greater Middle East. Sometimes we call it the Near East, sometimes the Middle East. The name changed over time, especially after the Cold War, after the Second World War, and after during the Cold War, after the First World War, the Second World War. So the name has changed to basically appease certain powers in the region. And notice that to the north of the yellow, where it says Greater Middle East, that's kind of Russia, Central Asia, the underbelly of Russia. And if you go west to my left, your right, that's the greenish area, that's North Africa and West Africa. Very important. Why am I talking about this? Why do we care? Why does America care about this region? Because if you look at the region, it has 4 very important choke of points. Whoever controls these choke of points, Gibraltar, Strait of Hormuz of Yemen, and the other 2 in the Arabian Gulf, sometimes they're called the Persian Gulf. Those areas, that's where the oil comes from, very, very important. And whoever controls the region controls the world. And why are we talking about Palestine? Whoever controls Palestine, whoever is defeated in Palestine, will rule the world. Okay, excuse me, will lose the world. Whoever wins in Palestine wins the world. Okay? King Genghis Khan, 1258, massacred everyone in Central Asia, gets to Palestine, 1261, Ain Jalut is destroyed, his empire collapses. Great Napoleon wins all over Europe, goes to Russia, goes to Gaza, gets defeated. He goes home to Russia, to Europe, Waterloo, he's done. Okay? So I can list countries after country. This region is so important because the last 8,000 years, all the superpowers of the world, except for the last 400 years, came from this region. Extremely important, extremely vital. No American president can ignore this region. As we have noticed after Mr. Obama said, we're going to pull out bad strategic mistake. Moving on. Okay, we got to talk about foreign policy, America's foreign policy. What does American foreign policy mean? What does foreign policy mean? Very, very important. Of course, it's a policy pursued by nation or nations in dealing with the world. How do you deal with the other side of the aisle or other side of the ocean? So policies are generally designed to pursue certain strategic interests. How do you become more powerful? How do you access material, raw material? How do you position yourself in international relations, okay, to empower yourself? So creating a foreign policy is the job of the head of state, prime minister, president, monarch, so forth and so on, okay? So in this country, we don't have a monarch, but we do have a president. In the United States, the president alone does not make foreign policy, okay? Congress, very important institution. That's where the money comes from. So the president will promise all countries everything, anytime, all the time, but only Congress has the power of the purse. They have to basically finance those operations. So it's a very powerful institution. I will talk about domestic groups, domestic interest entities that have also power, okay? So when did the United States begin to really focus on the Middle East? Before, really, only one time, 1830s or so, the United States reached an agreement with Muscat and Oman on the Arabian Gulf, okay? Because that's kind of midpoint between North America going around to China, and then with the open door policy in the 1800s, going to, it's called gunboat diplomacy. We're gonna open your country, whether you like it or not, for trade, okay? We'll talk about that later on. So, in 1944, toward the closing of the Second World War, okay, Mr. FDR had an advisor, John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes. Very important name to keep in mind. That's why the Harvard Business School is named after him. And is this guy, British citizen, hired to rescue the US economy after the Depression. Very important name. So in 1944, they met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, on a golf course. And the idea is, what do we do after Germany collapses and Japan surrenders? What do we do? So the British and the Americans met in New Hampshire, and the idea was, we need to have the following. We need to have an IMF, International Monetary Fund. We need to stabilize international currency, make loans to the World Bank to major projects. Okay, rescue the German economy with the Marshall Plan. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. And we're gonna also have access to oil. Access to oil, very important, okay? Black diamonds, I call it. Anyway, so very, very important to have access to oil. Where does the oil come from? Well, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. Mr. FDR met with the King of Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz, in 1944. Guess what day? Valentine's Day, just so you know, it's kind of beautiful. Valentine's Day, they met in the Red Sea, a resort, and basically said, well, we're gonna make you a king. You're gonna have a country, but I need to have access to oil. So this is the special relationship kind of started between the US and, of course, the United States. Very, very important to have access to oil. Whoever controls oil will control the world. Very important. Okay? So the wars that go into Afghanistan 2001, it's not really about terrorism, it's about oil, natural gas. We'll get into that later on during Q&A. So now we have the Cold War. After the successful completion of the Second World War, we are going to have a Cold War, which means no hot war, okay? It means heightened tension between two great superpowers with nuclear weapons, which was very, very dangerous war. So the Cold War, what is the strategy for the United States? How does the United States get involved? I'm going to take you through 4 different stages. The first one, the first stage basically, since the Middle East is adjacent to the USSR, we want to keep the USSR north in a cold climate, up north toward the North Pole, and we want to protect the oil fields. Protect the oil fields, very, very important. So FDR, like I said, now with King Abdulaziz and Saud, establishing this special, important, strategic relationship. Okay? Why is Saudi Arabia so important? because basically it's the center of the Muslim world. It is the center of the Middle East, okay, at that time. So, how did the US basically conduct its foreign policy in the Middle East? Number one, relying on the British Navy. No US troops on the ground, relying on the British Navy, okay? So, the US again not involved directly. The British basically, because they have long history in the Middle East, they know the culture, they know the tradition, they know how to divide Palestine, okay, obviously, they have that experience. So from 1945, the closing of the end of the Cold Second World War, now we're gonna have 1968, when the British basically decided to withdraw all their troops east of Suez. East of the Suez Canal, British troops are coming home because the British Empire was collapsing as a result of the Second World War. There is no money coming into the treasury, of course the increase of population, and of course they have to rely heavily on the United States. So we need a replacement. The United States between 1968 and 1979, that relied as a balancer. Keep in mind that term, balance, okay, between powers. So the US began to support Iran. They began to rely on Iran from 1968, 1979. So what happened in 1979? Okay, the US lost that power, okay, lost that strategic relationship with the Shah of Iran, and now certainly we have the Islamic Revolution of Iran, who took over. The US began to look at something called RDF, Rapid Deployment Forces, 1979 to 1991. This 12 years period, the United States was over the horizon, basically the long arms of the US military. Army and Navy, the long arms of the US military, Army and Navy, they patrol basically the region from afar. Do not have boots on the ground, okay? Because it's sensitive and you want to avoid that as much as you can. So that's the balancing act the US was playing until the first Gulf War. The US went in under Bush Sr., Bush 41. Iraqi forces ejected out of Iraq, US victory, forces stayed behind. Okay, to keep the balance of power, and to keep the balance, to keep Iraq down and keep Iran at bay. Keep Iraq down and keep Iran at bay. And that was kind of successful. Until 1992, 1993, and this is the strategic miscalculation, Mr. Clinton decided to keep the troops in the Middle East. To keep the troops in the Middle East. That was kind of educating to most people, at least in Saudi Arabia, including Osama bin Laden. Okay? So now we have this dual containment of Iran and Iraq until 2001. So this roughly 10-year period, basically decade, where we want to balance against Iran and Iraq. Mr. Bush, 43, becomes president, and now the new policy, foreign policy, was regime change. Regime change. We don't like you, we're not going to reform you, we're going to topple you. So this is the new policy that we have basically have been followed religiously since 2001. So, the US is increasingly constrained by the very forces that propelled it to become superpower. What are those forces that we basically weaken the US making those policies? So the founders established the Bill of Rights. It's enshrined in the Constitution, the first amendment to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, where power is distributed between Congress, between the presidency, between the state, and local city councils. So when your city council said, we don't really have power to call for a ceasefire, that's not true, okay? That's not true at all. Okay, so this fragmentation created problems when you make foreign policy. Number one, it takes too long to make foreign policy. Decisions are not made quickly. It takes a long, long time to do. Transnational civil society, public opinion does matter. Public opinion does matter. Protests do matter. So we focus on basically what we call outside-in forces. Meaning when you look at the executive branch, the presidents, you have the inner circle and the outer circle. Inner circle will be the president, sometimes vice president, depends on the relationship between the vice president and the president. And you have, of course, Defense Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, have the CIA, all those are the inner circle. They meet with the president, they have to have contact at least every day, okay, especially during times of war. The outside circle, I mean, during wartime, you don't have to be Secretary of Education, okay? Or Secretary of Okay, so let's look at these outside forces that influence American foreign policy. Number one, private citizens with money. Okay, private citizens with money. The news media, very important pillar in, of course, American democracy. Interest groups. Interest groups have a lot of power, have a lot of money to throw around. NGOs basically have a lot of power. Ethnic and religious groups. This is the Holy Land. Have you guys saw the map? We call that the Swiss cheese theory, okay? Where basically every settlement, there's another settlement that gives the other settlement a pay. That's what we have. So ethnic and religious groups have a lot of power and have a lot of influence. I'm going to skip this slide because we have like a minute and a half. So political analysts, okay, generally believe that U.S. citizens can be divided into three categories. The first category, mass public. The mass public are misinformed, uninformed, or ill-informed, or wrongly informed. And the second one is attentive public. They pay attention, they don't have much power, they pay attention, they read the news, okay? And you have the foreign policy elite, where you are organized, you raise money, you raise votes, you do meet with your representatives, and you write letters, okay? That's the foreign policy elite. So today, the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia is in decline. Why? Because of these policies, last 50, 60, 70 years, especially over Palestine. And after 1967 war, we have 2 UN resolutions. You already heard 242, right? That is 338, calling for Israel to withdraw from occupied Palestine. So, how did this policy fail? Number one, Russia now has access to the Mediterranean, warm water. That was against US policy during the Cold War. China is emerging as a power broker in the region. The US is becoming marginalized through the UN. Two-state solution, we've been talking about, unrealized. Terrorism and transnational crime are on the rise. Pro-Iran groups are in control of Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and everywhere else. Iran's nuclear deal is elusive, and the world is witnessing a genocide. Only the US can help to stop it. Where is your voice going to be? Skip. So the US stands alone as the most powerful country in the world and maintains unrivaled military strength. The US has the largest economy, but the fundamental problems are the following. Unwavering US support to Israel significantly basically creates problems for the US abroad. Selective democracy, we play democracy wherever we want, we plant it wherever we want. We have double standards, and that is kind of the built in the policy process. Support for oppressive and authoritarian regimes, conflicting interests, ignoring Resolution 242 and 338, as I mentioned, holding aggressors accountable for war crimes, that does support the pro-democracy Arab Spring, inconsistencies, and lastly, hypocrisy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for our four panelists. We're now going to stop for a 5-minute break. So those who want to pray Maghrib in congregation, please head this way from this door downstairs. And then everyone else, please go. Okay, so we'll get started with the Q&A session. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and Desmond will come with a microphone for you to ask your question, and then you can also specifically ask one of the speakers. So here we go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the panel. Dr. Zarouk gave us a brief about the foreign policy of the United States. Zarouk gave us also about the human rights and the black rights movement. Dr. gave us about the historical background, and Dr. Yuri gave us about the people of Palestine. But there was something missing here, in my opinion, which is the essence of the problem. Nobody talked about the began the first Zionist conference in 1897 in Basel, in Switzerland, where Theodor Herzl talked about a home for the Jewish. And here's the trick. They talked about home, not a state. What does home mean? Also, the Balfour Declaration, he talked about home. This was the trick. I stop here. I have one question to Dr. Zabo. You talked about the American foreign policy in the Middle East. Do you think Israel is a geopolitical asset to USA, and why? And the other question is, does USA have the free will not to support Israel if she wants? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Is Israel an asset to the United States? No, it's a liability. It's a liability. The American taxpayers cannot afford to send tents open I-40 just west of here. Yet we find $8.7 billion last week to Israel, $8 billion to Ukraine. It's a liability. I'm sorry, what's the second question?
Does the USA have the free will to not to choose to support Israel?
Well, that used to be the case. If you look at historically in 1956, by the way, under 4 Republican presidents, those 4 Republican presidents basically said no to Israel. 1993, Mr. Bush, 1991, my favorite Secretary of State, James A. Baker III, told Israelis, especially Netanyahu, you cannot come to the State Department, as long as I am Secretary of State, and you cannot give the $10 billion loan for settlements. You need to sit down with the Palestinians and stop peace process. And that's what got the Israelis to come to the negotiating table. After 2000, that is no longer the case. The Zionist lobby have hijacked American foreign policy. In 1956, it was Eisenhower, another favorite president of mine, when 1956 Suez Canal, the Israelis, the British, and the French invaded Egypt. Eisenhower said, you guys gotta stop, and you have to withdraw. Okay? Then Nixon stopped them. Reagan, no more support unless you withdraw from Lebanon. That Sabra and Shatila massacre happened during Reagan, and a good ally will inform the other ally if there is a threat against them. The Marines, in 1983 were bombed in Beirut. The Israelis who controlled the checkpoints knew that was happening, did not inform the United States. 1967 war, the USS Liberty was bombed by the Israelis. No one has been accountable for those crimes. So no, the US is definitely not in control of its own destiny. I mentioned in the last slide, they have interest groups who have hijacked the system. And of course, Israel is a liability and not an asset anymore. I hope that answers your question. National Board President.
Just because I was Googling this morning, I got curious about whether Herzl knew about the Christian Zionist movement that predated 1890, whatever it was. And he did. He actually was meeting with the Christian Zionists, and I was trying to find the email with the name. And there was they're the ones, the Christian Zionists in the early 1800s were the ones that came up with a land with no people, for people with the land. So it's Christian, just like River to the Sea is a Jewish statement. But what's the other thing? And it comes from, I think, is it Samuel 9/11? Which I thought 9/11 was an interesting date, that there's some statement, so look that up. I think it was Samuel. I'll find it. I'll leave it. Anyway, so that was interesting, that Herzl and the Christian Zionists, which predated Jewish Zionism, knew each other and talked and planned together. Okay.
Thank you, Erica. Well, actually, just a little anecdote about this. Some of those missionaries worked in the Middle East. They were working on a plan like this. building or founding the American University of Beirut. And this is the American University of Cairo. So they had the grand design, and basically designers jump on the bandwagon. Thank you.
You can add to this the Jesuit College for the French.
in Lebanon, and the Victoria College for the British in Cairo. Those are the institutions to breed leaders for the Middle East.
And that was in mid-1800s?
No, it's after that.
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't know the date. But the former president of Afghanistan, believe it or not, in the 50s, he studied at the American University of Beirut, and the American ended up, after Karzai, they put Ashraf Ghani to be the president. So those were the three institutions to produce the leaders.
I don't need the mic. This is a question for Dr. Zaroud. Building off your answer to the first question, these Zionist interest groups, how can we work to combat them in this day and age? And if you can touch on also how they were able to dominate our foreign policy. How did they get to that stage where they could?
Excellent question. This is the $2 million question. In the 1940s, when FDR was president and Jewish refugees were coming to America, guess what he did? I don't want them here. Take them to Palestine. I don't want to deal with them. Until they begin to grow political capital. That means money and votes. Money and votes. Money and votes. Mr. Truman, who came right after FDR, I can get Jewish votes. Let's create a state of Palestine. One person in that administration, George C. Marshall, one of my favorite cities in the world, Uniontown, Pennsylvania. He said to Mr. Truman, no. If we help create a Jewish state in the Arab world, we will always have to be liable. We have to defend them every war. And that's exactly what we're doing. So George C. Marshall saw that vision a long time ago. How do we combat that? Well, they are very smart. They are super smart. They collaborate. They have tons of dinero. So if you want to compete with them, first, when we go to city council to protest, speak with one voice. I don't want to see 12 different organizations competing for different visions and different narratives. That's weakness. So we go in front of everybody, coordinate before you go. Okay? Raise money. Politicians are for sale. You could just write a check and you will buy them. That's what Senator Helms, who worked at WRAL in the 70s and 80s, he was anti-Jewish. He was not only anti-Zionism, he was anti-Semitic. I found a way to get to him. He became the strongest supporter of the state of Israel. So we have to be smart about collaboration and about producing people with the same narrative. We haven't done that. Okay? They're very smart. And they have billionaires supporting them. Can we do that? If I have a rally and I invite 2,000 people, 4 people show up, that's weakness. So we need to change the way we do business. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Here you go.
How are you going to answer that? So, I actually wanted to piggyback on something that my friend Clifford was talking about. It's a couple of things that I want to talk about. So my name is Salma Ali, and I'm pleased to be here. I started my own ventures after being in technology for 26 years and mother of 3 children, proudly. There's a lot of youth in this room, and to just reiterate the point that Clifford made, I'm sorry, I'm calling you my lady last night, is it's very easy to get tangled up when accusations and injustice is being witnessed day in and day out in our personal and surroundings, in our personal lives and surroundings. What's important for the youth to remember is how we respond to it and how we hold on to our Muslim characters through this hardship and all of this ordeal. It's easier said than done, but I can tell you I live by example. So It was around, you know, I love academia. Academia is something that, you know, is very dear to my heart. But the irony of academia is that we discuss and talk a lot more, but we sometimes not necessarily do enough in terms of actions. Now, it can be viewed and argued, of course, but that's why I was resonating with the gentleman sitting, is, you know, there's a lot going on, but how are we responding to it? What actions, you know, peaceful actions, if I must say, and add, are being taken? And how do we figure out who is the actual decision maker? Because even in everything that I heard tonight, I still am not able to determine who's the decision maker, right? We all are confused about that. Is it UN? Is it US? Is it Palestinians or Israelis, or who is it? So some food for thought, and I just want to thank everyone for your time.
You know, this question of who is the decision maker is not really a trivial question, as you can see. For example, in the US, how the decision is taken, it's a very complicated process that has the think tanks involved, universities involved, Congress involved, oil companies involved. You know, big companies have a say. So if this is the decision maker in the US, what about something like about Palestine? When Trump was president, he came with the deal of the century. Basically, through the Palestinians, he has $50 billion. And this should deal with the issue. Meaning, it's no longer a political issue, let's get the economy going, let's enrich the people of this and this and that. So Abbas told him the famous Allah yakhrab baytak. In Arabic, the way is, may Allah destroy your home. But this is not the literal way Allah yakhrab baytak. So if Abbas found this to be very, very offensive, and Abbas has been, you know, a crony of the Zionists and the US, no doubt about it, and he's an enemy of the Palestinian people. I mean, the people who are in the Palestinian jails, the people who have been punished and tortured by the Palestinian Authority, is beyond. I mean, Sheikh Omar Barouthi, they drill in his bones. I mean, this is supposed to be our own people. So I think it's a combination. The US definitely have the major say. The Israelis have a big say. The Palestinians, marginal say. And of course, the UN is a tool. So whenever the US want to activate the UN, they will come to the end. Whenever they want to say do it outside, they will do it outside. So I think it's not one entity decision in this regard. Let me just finish by saying that the dynamics in Palestine right now is that the secular Jews are very, very scared of this new right-wing, Smotrich, Fair, and company. They are saying now they are attacking Palestinian in their fields. Tomorrow they will tell us how to dress, what to eat, where to go. So even among secular Jews, there is now this concern, and they do not like what they see. That's why the differences within the Israeli societies, from different levels, the rich and the poor, the Westerners and the Eastern, Jews, the religious and the not so religious, those who want to live in the West Bank, those who will never accept to live in the West Bank. So again, there are too many contradictions within the same society. As for the Palestinians, I think at this point there is a big support for Hamas. For how long this will be remains to be seen. But the only people that support Abbas and company are the people who have been checked at the end of the month. I have not seen a person who is not having, because they pay for about 180,000 Palestinians. 180,000 Palestinians, they take those who have retired from the town of Yasser Arafat in the 60s until now, each one get a paycheck. The rest of the people, they despise Abbas and his people. That's the reality of Palestine.
Excuse me. So my question is more about the Oslo Accords. I've heard so many things about it. I mean, like, yeah, looking at it at first, it seems like there's gonna be like, it seems like a hope for peace. It seems like there might actually be a solution or a temporary solution. But it turned out not to be that way, and it turned out like actually one of the biggest mistakes. And I even recall from the last education panel, this being mentioned, that it was one of the worst mistakes and one of the worst things actually to happen to the Palestinians, even though it was, hopefully gonna be the best. So I just wanted to learn more about the Oslo Accords. Why was it actually like very detrimental? Why was it very like harmful to the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank? Yeah.
I can take this. Hi. So the Oslo Accords, I think that people would say that it was detrimental because on the one hand, first of all, these accords were in small steps. And one of the first steps in 1993 was to have Arafat recognize Israel. Israel does not recognize a Palestinian state. It just recognizes that they're Palestinians and they can have some self-determination. And so just from the very beginning, there's an inequality. And we also talk about the US as this neutral broker. And Clinton, touts himself as a neutral broker. But in the end, we have the US and Israel, and we have the Palestinians, right? The Palestinians do not have a state. They don't have a military. They have Yasser Arafat only, right? And we have, no one's talked about this, but we have racism, right? We have this idea that the British, I'm writing this in my book right now, that the British said, we're gonna have this, we're going to cultivate this immigration. And why are we going to cultivate immigration from Europe? Because if we can have a lot of European Jews in Palestine, then we can raise everybody up to modernity, to this level of civilization, thinking that the Arab peasant, anyone that was not white, that was not European, needed to have someone to save them, when obviously this is not true. And I think that there was a moment, I think that a lot of people, even, I think if you talk to Palestinian leaders, 1993 was kind of this moment of hope, although very quickly it wasn't, because we have Oslo 2, where we have this map where there's this, the West Bank is supposed to be Palestine, but then the air, the water, the electricity, everything is still controlled by Israel. Not only that, but we have these little enclaves, so settlers are still there, there's still checkpoints, and so how do you have a country, how do you have a state when you can't even get from the beginning to the top to bottom of the West Bank? And one last thing I want to say is that I was going to say, and I said in previous years, or last year, is that Hillary Clinton then comes and says, my husband, you've all heard this, that they said that all of the people who are having encampments, all of the academics, all the students, that they don't know history. Well, she is referring to the Ehud Olmert making this big pledge to Arafat in this kind of last attempt to get some agreement done. And nobody at that table, not Omar, not Clinton, thought that this was an actual deal. There wasn't even a map. I mean, why would would any leader say, well, yeah, I'll just trust you that you'll just give me what you say, right? There's not even a map showing where Palestine would be, right? And so Hillary Clinton saying that this was the chance, and they blew their chance, but when really it was never anyone, and nowhere near an equal footing.
Can I just add, why the Palestinian leadership went into Oslo? There is a simple reason. Hamas took over the state during the first Intifada that she mentioned. So Hamas took over the Palestinian state. It was a matter of time before Arafat and his people became irrelevant in Palestine. Remember, they were still outside Palestine, in Tunisia and in Sudan and somewhere else. So when they realized that Hamas is taking over the state during the Intifada, and eventually the PLO will not be there in this regard, they went through this round of meeting in Oslo, which led to the Oslo agreement from that aspect. I mean, this is an important aspect that we need to understand, because eventually, when they sign with the Israelis, as just was mentioned, let's take the water. The Palestinians came with suits and ties to the meeting. The Israelis came with all sorts of maps and plans for all the water in Palestine. And the Palestinians have no idea where's the water. So basically they sign on blank all what they get, and it's an important point that I would re-emphasize what was said, that the Palestinians, what they got from Oslo is that Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people, period. Nothing else, absolutely nothing else. Arafat recognized Israel have a right in Palestine, and the Israelis, all what they recognize, Arafat and his people are the representative of the Palestinian people, and we will negotiate. Now, when you negotiate, the Israelis have the army, they have the economy, they have the water. There was a program on public TV here where they showed that for every 35 gallons that the Jewish use in Palestine, the Palestinians use 1 gallon of water. And if you drill a well now, they will come and dump concrete in it, because according to the Oslo agreement, Palestinians cannot dig a well to get water. You can dig a well to get winter water, the rain, but not beyond that. So that was the aspect. Arafat thought he's finished, and let me close with this. The Israelis played a role in strengthening Hamas. No doubt about it. Anyone who really argues at this point does not know the history and the reality. Because what the Israeli leadership was thinking, okay, no way we will have a Palestinian state, period. Not last week, not last year, not 20 years ago. This was a decision already taken. So basically they thought, if we can bring the Islamic, quote unquote, resistance, they will, balance the PLO, and then, as we know, Netanyahu made a major role in financing through Qatar and this and that. Of course, things, you know the rest of the story by October 7th.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, kind of following up with that answer. I know up to the 70s and 80s, most of the Palestinian resistance was secular organizations like the PLO or the PFLP. And so what explains why the resistance shifted from more secular leftist groups like that to Islamist parties like Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad?
You want to take the first shot, please?
I'll take a first shot. There's, the Cold War is the simple answer, right? There was resistance, there was communist resistance, there was socialist resistance, and all over the Middle East. But obviously, during the Cold War, the U.S. propped up Islamists, political Islam, and gutted any communist or leftist organizations. And so we have a rise in political Islam around that time.
Thank you for the question. Well, I after 1967 war, Palestinians, Arabs in general, realized that Pan-Arabism is dead and has failed them miserably. So we need to find an alternate way to combat the occupation. In the 80s, there was the Afghan war, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And Reagan, of course, and Charlie Wilson, congressman from Texas, the movie, you've probably seen the movie with Tom Hanks, true story. So now suddenly, political Islam are mujahideen. We should support them. And they came to the White House, okay, who were the mujahideen, who became the Taliban later on. So we play with these terminology every now and then. So political Islam became a solution because Yasser Arafat was not really considered a nationalist leader. Him and his friends, inner circle, took all the money, did not spend money on refugee camps. But you guys asked the question earlier, the United States does have power and influence. When the US government works for its own interests, the US will push the Israelis around. November 4th, 1995, check the date, double checking on that. November 4th, Rabin was assassinated, okay, by followers of Mr. Netanyahu. Okay? Mr. Netanyahu refused to continue the peace process, but he was forced by the Clinton administration to meet at a place in Maryland called Wye River, W-Y-E. So Netanyahu was forced to sign that agreement, giving, I think, 7 Palestinian towns back to the Palestinian Authority. So the US understands its own interest, will push the Israelis to sign something. Because Mr. Biden could call Netanyahu saying, in 30 minutes, you're not going to get any more money or weapons, you will stop the war today. The war will stop today. Okay? So the US has to understand what the national interests are, and we don't have leaders that have a vision. If you want to cave into the Zionist lobby in Washington as a president, you're allowed to do it for 1 day, maybe 2 days. After that, that genocide has to stop. Because now Biden has to go into the grave with that on his record. The UN lived with that, okay? So the US, when it negotiates faithfully, we do get peace process going. Until then, we're gonna end up with this. Now, the Zionist dream, since they are a minority in the Middle East, and that cannot function, okay? That cannot really colonize the Middle East without help. First, members of Congress. Second, executive branch. Third, Christian Zionism. But most importantly, every war in the Middle East, they are behind it. They split South Sudan from Sudan. Now they're building the Renaissance Dam on the Nile River, creating more friction between Egypt and Ethiopia. Who's supporting Ethiopia? The Israelis. Okay? Civil war in Sudan. Who's arming the various sides? Lebanon has been in war since before it became a country, has been at war. Someone is behind that, okay? Libya, where can we get Libya with all the oil back together? Nobody wants it to become a country, okay? Now, the Abrahamic Accord that, that we're bragging about with Mr. Trump a long time ago, that has basically is thrown out the window now. That's no longer realization. No country will sign a peace treaty with the current Israeli regime. They're right wing, they're fascist, and they're not interested in peace. Netanyahu said it in 1977, the first time the Likud party had enough votes in parliament and the Knesset to really appoint a prime minister or elect a prime minister, right? And this is the famous quote they have. We want to have Palestine, well not Palestine, but the region from the river to the sea. So when we say from the river to the sea, it's an affront to them. That's how we have to look at it. I'm sorry, I rumbled on too much. I've been talking all day. Thank you.
Just add 2 minutes in this regard.
The early 70s in the Middle East start to be the rise of organization, Islamic and otherwise, and to take more of a active role within the society. What the NGOs now do. So, for example, there was an earthquake in Egypt. The government was asleep, and it was those groups that came and brought the supplies and the food and so on and so forth. So, but you know, same thing, you know, people who went to study in Egypt and Jordan, they came to the West Bank and started initiating this Hamas group. From this perspective, you could see that those groups who are now fighting, you know, the Israelis were not born 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You go back to the 70s. The only exception is the Shia groups, Amal and Hezbollah, who were really, you know, late 70s for Amal and early 80s for Hezbollah.
Can I add anything to that? Just really quickly too, there's, the United States started thinking about economy differently, like had free trade agreements with a lot of different countries. Then also, this was the time when of neoliberalism, where the thought was small government and to roll back subsidies on bread and household goods, and also to roll back any union organizing and wages. And so if we only have political Islam as the only alternative to the Muslim Brothers, for example, in Egypt, would provide medicine and healthcare out of the mosques because healthcare was being gutted by these structural adjustment programs, just gutting anything that was state-led, trying to privatize everything. And it didn't work in a lot of places in the Middle East, and so we have these Islamic groups, political Islamists, stepping in to provide all of the social services that the state no longer did.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Do you have one last question?
So we saw how the student movement gain a lot of momentum and how it moved forward. But I feel like many feel hopeless in how they've been unheard by faculty, administration, and even like the government, who refuse to make any statements of ceasefire or any type of resolution like that. What advice do you have for students to stand up for Palestine within our community?
Wait, can we hear all the last questions after each other? So we have one. Did you have another one?
Honestly, I was going to ask the exact same
Okay,
thing,
same
but more
question.
so, you know, giving a little bit of background on the general reunion of Palestinian students before the Oslo Accords, and then how we can use that, you know, or how they were operating, you know, and use that same approach, you know, in today's time.
Yeah, so in all of this, I think we have forgot to mention the flag of the Christians in Palestine. And we know that there is ethnic cleansing of Christians, and we don't find the churches here much vocal about them. And what is our analysis on why the church is silent on the flag of Christians in Palestine?
Okay, so we have why the church is silent. We have what can students do, you know, after the loss of hope since the student protests in campus last spring.
Can you start with the Christians first? The easier one. I'm not sure, actually, I don't know the answer to why they're not supporting. I mean, it depends on which Christians you're asking, right? The Christians in Palestine have always been marginalized since the British mandate. In fact, the British policy was to, the British are in India and they're fighting Muslim riots or revolts in India, and they're thinking, we need to placate the Muslims in Palestine. And so at some point they actually, there's divide and rule, but they also are ostracizing the Christians. They didn't find them as much of a threat to mandate in Palestine. Does anyone else want to, sorry?
The role of churches here.
The role of churches here? Yeah, you want to take that on?
Right, but this is, basically, you hear a lot about from Allah, right? That's the seat of the Messiah authority, although it's actually in my hometown, Elvira. Elvira is a hometown for the Muslims, traditionally, and Ramallah was for the Christians. That was, you know, that was growing up, well known. Now Ramallah does not have more than 200 Christians. No more than 200 Christians. They are the most well-organized group in the U.S. because they immigrated. The reason for this is that the Israelis when they start dealing with the Jewish tradition. This is a Jewish tradition. So that fatal turn that they did toward the Christian is what they get the Palestinian Christians to be anti-Zionists. And the U.S. churches will not like this. Because basically, they are taking the same stand as Muslims in this regard. Because again, the Israelis try to get even at the property of the Christian churches. There's a big scandal with the Armenian church selling a piece of land, and supposedly the Israelis taking it. So this aspect initially was not there, because they gave them consideration. Now there's no difference. You go to the airport, they put the Muslim aside and they put the Christian aside. And as I said again, the churches in the US are influenced by, mostly, not all of them, by this Zionist view. Although, what's interesting, in fact, some of the Jews are saying we do not want this Christian support, because basically the theory of those Christian churches is that we're going to support Israel to become strong, so the Messiah will come and then we will kill the Jews or they become Christians. And they are not stupid, but Netanyahu knew very well what they stand for in this regard. Not sure if that addressed the issue.
This is a really great question. Those churches in Palestine or the Middle East are not evangelical Christians. That's very important. Evangelical Christians have a mission. Not only prayers and hold hands and break bread. They have a bigger, wider mission. So don't consider the Orthodox Christians or Catholic Middle Easterners or Easterners to be really true Christians. They're not saved. Okay? So we have that, and this goes back to the Middle Ages. It goes back actually to the Great Schism over 1,000 years ago. And there was a big war called the Religious Wars, the 30 Years' War in Europe, 1618 to 1648 in Europe. And they ended up, of course, with the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, which is in Germany. All these denominations get together and say, you know what, are we all Christians? Well, on paper, yes, but in practice, not so much. So this is how do you know they're real Christians? They could be Muslims hiding in robes like priests and preachers. So this is kind of mistrust, And so it's not really against specific religious group, it's against an ethnic group. I hope I answered that question. Can we watch football now?
Just would like to touch on student protests and
Go ahead.
All right. Well, students, you do have a lot of talent. You do have a lot of energy. You do have the upper hand. You do have the IT skills, okay? What I will do, instead of marching down the streets, shut down their emails. Send 1,000 emails a day and copy me. I love that, okay? If they don't want to meet with you, be respectful. Send them emails. Send them letters. Meet with their representatives. Meet with their staff. Their staff are the decision makers. Members of Congress don't know, I don't want to curse, I promise not to. They know nothing about the Middle East. Actually, they don't know anything about America, much less the Middle East. Meet with the staff. When you have committees in Congress, standing committee, temporary committees, that's where the power is in the committee. They study the issue. They research the issue. They make recommendations to your representatives. He or she goes to the House or Senate floor and they vote. Do they know anything about the issue? Not a clue. So you guys find those young folks in these offices, meet with them, talk to them, take pictures of them, okay? And trust me, you build that camaraderie, if you will, okay, use a communist term, okay? Meet with them, don't brainwash them, we want the truth. We don't want to harm anybody, but we want justice, we want peace, okay? So this is my take. Flood their mailbox. Don't send weird stuff. Please be respectful, but do send emails, 1,000 emails a day, okay? You talk to us, these are issues, and then we'll talk to you. I do it all the time. I get good practice now. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
What if the
publicize them. We publicly shame them. And that's a good strategy. You gotta do it, okay? I don't want to start a revolution by being, labeled as anti-whatever, okay? So, any more questions, comments, concerns, opinions, criticism? You want to add anything, Kristen?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not, I'm wondering why the administration of I mean, I think that this is bigger than the administration of NC State, for example.
I mean, specifically for divestment.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I mean, I think that's gonna be hard, and I do think though that students showing solidarity, being informed, and then also kind of making, public, kind of having things like this, having public solidarity is helping the movement in ways that you don't realize, and that there's power in numbers at NC State, and that, faculty who are not, you are doing something to help, further the movement.
If I may just add, very important to be within the law. Very, very important. Anarchy and, those acts, my guess, whoever is leading this would be an FBI agent. In one instant, I get this Steve guy who was an FBI agent. I mean, word of mouth, he told me, listen, if you and your children will be a character witness for so and so, I will go, we will go, as an FBI, we will go after you and your children. I said, wait a minute, are we in Iraq or are we in the USA? I thought we went to Iraq to change them like us. This is exactly what Saddam does in this regard. No response. So those guys, because they offered me to work for them. I mean, yeah, I told that, I said, no, I want to be as far from you as I can, and I want you to be as far from me as you can. So I really would warn you, be within the law. Even if you think this is not, the way to make a quick change, don't fall into that trap.
All right, guys, so thank you so much for attending our event today, and let's give our panelists a huge round of applause.